Hey there, gang. Thank you so much for tuning in to what is now episode number 60 of Talking About Horses. And I am super excited, very pleased to be joined today for podcast number 60 on Talking About Horses by my friends, Dr. Paul Haefner and Justin Haefner of Riding Far. I'm really excited to be talking to these guys. Riding Far was founded over 20 years ago with the simple idea that riders could benefit from a better understanding of themselves, their horses, and how to create change. All riders, regardless of experience or discipline, meet challenges along the way. At Riding Far, Paul and Justin help riders move through these challenges. It's more than your typical sports psychology or horse training. They've dedicated themselves to creating transformative experiences for equestrians and horses through compassionate and expert education, mentorship, and guidance. Paul, Justin, thank you guys so much for joining me here on Talking About Horses.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to this conversation.
Hey, where can we find that intro you read? That sounds pretty good.
Where you? Well, yeah. It's great when you write this stuff ahead of time, right? So, and that's, tongue in cheek and of course in jest. But, can you guys give me a little bit of an idea? Like, break that down. We've got the description of what sounds good in a brochure or on a Facebook page, right? But who is Paul Haefner? Who is Justin Haefner? Talk to me about that.
You want to start?
No, old man goes first.
So I think we can actually tell the story pretty concisely. For me, growing up in a non-horsey family, but being a horse nut, I got about the serious business of life, going to school, ended up in grad school, got a degree in psychology, was practicing. And then it was like, well, okay, so how do I put this together with the things I'm really passionate about, which is horses? Mm-hmm. This is going back to the late 90s. The two answers I came up with were sports psychology work with equestrians, and then what people know of as equine-assisted psychotherapy, equine-assisted learning, coaching, that kind of stuff. And so back in, probably saw my first equestrian-related client back in the 98 or 99. Fast forward, a long time. Justin went back in 2017, I think, was talking about starting his business, and then he discovered one of the hard facts of life is that when you're 18 and you don't have any track record,
nobody wants to insure you.
So there you go.
I had equine exposure insurance for the equine assisted work I had. I said, well, come on into the business. And he's training horses for people, working with people and their horses. And I'm doing the equine assisted work. And he's the one that came to me and said, I watch what you do with people. I know that a lot of my clients could really use some help with their mental game. And I knew that a lot of my clients could use help with their horses. And Justin said we should do something together. So that's how it all got started. Who am I? And the idea in terms of our business is that when you have an issue or a problem and it involves you and your horse, the equestrian industry is built in silos. So, even the mental skills consultants, they do their thing and they live in their little silo. And then the horse trainers over here are doing this. So what ends up often happening is either they get expert help from somebody, but it's isolated, for themselves. There's no involvement with their horse. For the horse, there's no involvement for them. Or, and this is, from my perspective, even worse, they go to somebody who says, oh, well, I do this, but I also do that. Now, I'm going to allow for the possibility that there are people who are experts in multiple different things. But typically what happens is that someone has an expertise, like they're an expert with horses and they've been working with people, and then they think of themselves as, well, now I can help people, with fear problems and fear issues. And then, it's like horses. There's like 60, 70% of the horses that will put up with almost anything, and they'll be okay. Right.
Right.
But what happens when you bump into that client with, complex trauma history, or has, emotional challenges that are not sort of run of the mill, or have, are struggling in lots of different ways, and that's where I think things kind of fall down. So our idea is that I get to be a psychologist, and I have some knowledge and understanding and skills in horses, so I can support during a clinic or something like that.
Yeah, and I get to focus on what I do best, and that's work with the horses. And I think I represent the horse trainer population pretty well in that I love people, but that's just not my expertise. And that's what we run into a lot is kind of this little bit of this bumping up against the concept of our collaboration, because people who train horses feel like they carry the weight of all that stuff on, and almost proudly. So it's like, well, why would I need help from a psychologist? I take care of all my clients' issues, and and if they're anything like me, they really shouldn't carry all of that. It's if you're not trained to help people with their issues on that level, we're really out of our depths there. So I get to focus on what I do best and help the horses and develop the horses and teach horsemanship, and consult with Paul if there's something that comes up with my clients in the barn. And that ranges from a difficult situation just in terms of dynamics to actually fear in the arena, and we're actively working on that. In that way, I've learned a ton about people just in working together for
sure,
I don't know how many years we've really been put things together at this point. But
I think it's been about maybe we've been working pretty consistently together for about 6 years now. So so I'm and I saw my first client in 1987. How many years ago is that?
That's a lot of years.
That's a lot of years.
It's a couple.
I'm old as shit. Yeah. I got Justin's business is starting, young high performance horses, loves that, does some problem solving stuff, restarts and things like that. And then when people come to us, they, when we're doing a clinic together, they get all of that expertise, right? They don't have to, they don't have to settle for less, I guess is probably one way to say it. So,
and that's one of the coolest things I think about working together, especially in our clinics, is, we can have 8 people that, and we do consistently, the folks who come in are so varied.
Oh yeah.
And we can have very, folks who ride every couple weeks and go trail riding, to high performing dressage riders, and folks who are really terrified to get on at the mounting block, and all in the same clinic. And it's pretty much every time we can end the weekend with everyone having a certain degree of satisfaction and direction. And and that, I think, is just because what we offer varies enough to help those different folks.
Yeah. The stuff like he's talking specifically, we have this series of clinics we call Fresh Start. And it's Fresh Start 1, 2, and 3. There's 3-day clinics.
That was a funny story. We sat down to outline a 1-day clinic on fear and anxiety. and we wrote
Okay.
down everything we would want to teach in the curriculum for the day. And it was like a book. And so we said, okay, like this can't be one day, this has to be a 3-day clinic. So we broke it down into 3 days, and then we were like, we can't fit all of that in each day. So we broke that down again. Now it's 9 days. It's 3-day clinics. So
but I think what Justin is saying can't be oversold. I mean, I think it's testimony to what we offer, that you could have someone coming in who's terrified to get on their horse, and in the same clinic, a professional dressage rider who's got questions and challenges with their horse around anxiety issues, and they can both walk away, first of all, having something to offer each other in the process of the clinic, because we do a lot of discussion and a lot of conversation and sharing of experience and things of that sort. They both can help each other and both walk away feeling like, this has been a really great thing for them. And that to me, that's the coolest thing. Right.
And that's just, we wouldn't be able to do that if we weren't teaching together. And that's, there's a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what's got me thinking, like, Paul, when you mentioned like somebody who's good at one thing and says, well, I can do this other thing also. Right. They're going to be doing that other thing. And of course, I'm making an assumption on this, right? So correct me if you think I'm wrong, but they're going to be doing that other thing from the base that they've done this first thing. So they're really just doing the same thing and just extending it to another individual, that individual either being the horse in that situation if they're doing both, or the person in that situation if they're doing both. And so the collaboration with you, Paul, specializing in people and understanding horses, and Justin specializing in horses and understanding people. Like it's no surprise to me when you talk about, sitting down to make up that clinic and you realize, wow, it's a whole lot more than what we thought it was going to be. Right. And I think that's testament to how much each side is bringing to the table. And I think that there's, when you sat down to do that, I know I've sat down just recently with a collaborative clinic that I'm going to be putting together that I can't release details on yet, but it's going to be pretty exciting. But, when we sit down, it's like, sure, I can present this thing that I want to present in 3 days. Or in 1 day, right? And the other person can present what they want to present in that 1 day, but you put the two of it together and you've got that one thing and that other thing, and then you've got the collaboration of it, right? Which extends and as well as deepens what you're doing, right? And I think that's so interesting and such a winning combination. And to go to what you were talking about, Justin, how you've got trainers, people that are specializing with horses. I mean, how many of them to begin with would tell you that they got into horses because they don't like people? Which is really, if you're a trainer, if you're a horse trainer and you're listening to this, if you got into this deal because you don't want to work with people, you're in the wrong damn business.
I've yet to come across a horse that can write a check. So.
Yeah, exactly. Every horse that you're going to work with is connected to a people. So you need to work with people.
Yeah.
Well, and yet, right, the psychology that we use to work with horses can be, oftentimes is, very different, right, than what we use to work with people, because we're motivated by different things. And Paul's, okay, so I know we're going to have a good conversation seeing Paul's eyes. This is where I there's that, you see a little bit like some of these folks that are really fantastic with horses, but terrible with people. Right. Even if they try to offer you help, they're awful at offering the person help, because they're only used to operating from a way that, say, their aids are clearly understood by the horse or by a large N, right? A large number of horses. And that's a very different story when it comes to people, right? You can't just, I mean, you could add more whip, add more leg, whatever, pull a person around with the reins, but that's not going to have the same effect as what it is with the horse.
Yeah. I think the way I see it, and steer me off somewhere else if you need to. But is like, if we're really working with a horse in a way that's good for them as well as us, then what we're doing is operating off of kind of a seeking of understanding what their needs are. So one of the things we talk about is that, and you'll have to go into where this comes from because I can never remember. Marshall Rosenberg, nonviolent communication.
Oh yeah.
So I just remembered. So the idea is that if we're trying to solve a problem or a situation, we can figure that out where my needs are met as well as your needs.
Right. So what Marshall said, and I cannot find this quote anywhere, but I know he said it. He said, there is no conflict on the level of need. All conflict exists on the level of strategies we use to meet our needs. And if we're in conflict, conflict is simply a crisis of creativity. And to me, that is just such a powerful statement. You know, if we do our best to understand what our horses need, if we do our best to understand what we need and take responsibility for getting our own needs met, then, you know, in that interaction, we can be creative in finding ways that, you know, our horses' needs get met in ways that our needs get met.
And in that way, there's really no difference between working with the horses and working with people, but the level of the needs, what the needs are, is different.
Yeah.
And and that's really tough that's one that I have to think about a lot, because it really feels like it's your needs or mine. And that when it comes down to with the horses, it's like, well, I need to get X, Y, and Z done because I need to pay the bills. Well, you know, a lot of my pursuit is how can I meet my needs in a way that I'm also meeting my horses. But you see the flip side. You see, horses and human relationships. You see people who completely give up their own needs because they think they have to do that in order to meet their horses' needs. And that, you know, I love that framework. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, and it's the piece of it, and the part of the reason I got to thinking when you said that, I like the Marshall Rosenberg's ideas. There is, you know, a core, I don't know, value, or, you know, some of the core things are the same for horses and humans and horse and human relationships, but the specifics of it are different. And that would be one example. Horses have needs, we have needs. It's a relationship between two sentient beings. You know, we are going to, because we're initiating the relationship, we have to take responsibility if we want it to go well. Right? So imagine you're dating. Okay? And you're online and you've set up lunch, you know, with somebody, and you this actually happened to somebody. So you sit down, and the person comes in and sits down, and some girl walks over and hands you like a bouquet of like grocery store flowers in the plastic wrapper and a $5 bill. And hands it to you. Right? Well, where do you go with that? Right? Now,
I think that might be my response. Where do you go with that? Is that for the cup of coffee, or what?
The person who initiates it, and, you know, the idea of bringing flowers, you know, as a way of you know, expressing one's interest and generosity or kindness or whatever, right? It's not, they have a need to try to connect. It's just the way they're doing it is in that case did not turn out to be successful. It raised conflict.
There you raised conflict. So, there you go.
And it, you know, and it, you know, with horses and humans, you talk about, you know, the trainer that can, you know, get along with the horse. Well, the currency, what's the currency of that relationship, right? It's, in essence, it's nonverbal, right? And generally the currency of many human to human relationships, at least adult ones, is almost all verbal, right? And there's a combination of verbal and behavioral and stuff. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not suggesting that there isn't things like body language and, you know, energy and all these other things. But because the currency is so different, people may be more comfortable in one framework than another, right? But the underlying dynamics, the things that have to happen for that relationship to be successful, at the core of it are the same. And that's the stuff we've been talking about, you know, for a couple of years now. It's the same on this sort of psychological, philosophical level, but it's also the same on a neurological level. And that's the stuff that's really exciting that we can talk about when we talk about people and horses, is that the mammalian adaptations, you know, you hear things like polyvagal theory and stuff, or you hear the affective neuroscience by a guy named, you know, that was spearheaded by a guy named Jaak Panksepp. These things are the same, you know. Sure, the horse's brain is different than ours, right? But there are some structures and adaptations that we share, which provide us an understanding of how, you know, how those systems work, and importantly, how they regulate, because that's what we're all about anyway, right? Regulation and integration. That's it. That's, you know, regulation and integration, and well, let's say this will be the first time we've said this: regulation, integration, communication. You know, those are the three things that make everything successful, right?
There you go. Regulation, integration, communication.
And he's just making shit up.
Yeah.
Hey, it sounds good. It sounds good. I'll sign up for that clinic.
He's got a thing that is a great formula, but he sends me this PDF the other day, and it's like this nice little, here, you say it. What?
Well, it's connection is the foundation of.
Look at me, I can't remember.
Connection is the foundation of regulation. Regulation is the foundation of. Now no. I can't remember.
Now you can't remember.
Connection is the foundation of regulation. Regulation is the foundation of exploration. Exploration is the foundation of learning.
That's right.
So I send him this slide. I was like all proud of this slide, and I send it to him.
I'm like, that's great. Where'd you find that?
Oh my God.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting when you talk about, and I love the way that you're thinking about it, Paul, the idea that we share a lot of common needs, right? One of the things that I try to stress to riders all the time is that our number one job as a rider is to be constantly improving our horse's confidence as a learner and as a partner. And as a teacher of people, our number one job is to be constantly improving our students' confidence as a learner and as an achiever. Absolutely. Right. And so that makes perfect sense when we say it that way. But what really got me was when you said there's a difference in currency. I think that's a really fantastic way to phrase that. There's a difference in currency. So what equals, you know, some value to me is going to be a different, you know, it's going to take something different to equal that value in a horse, you know, so to speak. So I think that's such a great way to think about it. Because how many times do riders say, well, I'm doing this for him and that should make him feel better, or I'm doing that and that should make him more confident, right? And like
Or, yeah,
I've
he
been,
gets to
I
hang
don't know,
out
I'm
23
wait
hours a
I
day. I just
waited,
want
didn't I
more.
wait long enough?
Yeah.
Right. And
Well,
then,
and a lot of the times when folks are really at odds with their horses, it's really that conflict of the currencies. It's like they're being very unclear with their body language and their energy, and at the same time, so the horse is really confused, but they really want them to love them. So whatever that looks like, cookies or carrots or whatever. So now this horse is confused and food aggressive, and it's like it becomes this whole,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just the currency is completely different.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have, and this may be a discussion for a different day, but the overlay on all of this is that people are acculturated to think and approach relationships and learning in a way that is totally not helpful, right?
Right.
So our learning, we start in school, and it's very product oriented, outcome oriented. It's and you look at educational models. So most I think the research would support me in saying that those early years, right, like kindergarten. I mean, I remember Mrs. McLyman. And I remember that she let us build those big wall of those cardboard bricks, those big cardboard bricks. And then you could sit on the school bus and someone could push you and you could crash into the wall and knock it all down. I'm freaking 62 years old. I was 4. I remember that, right? So this idea of engagement, of social connection, of skillfulness in that way, of sorting, and all that stuff is primary in building confidence in learners. So what do? We put kids in kindergarten and say, well, they can't go to first grade until they read. And we'll sit them down and you'll learn this. Well, there are sex differences in development, which actually give girls an advantage in kindergarten, because boys in general, neurologically, can't really sit down until they're 7. So we've got 2 or 3 years, where, we're just working against their neurology. But so we're acculturated in these ways to expect learning to happen, to be able to control things, to be straight line in our thinking, to be outcome oriented, and all that sort of stuff.
A
and
plus
then
B is C, and
right. And how many times do you see that when you're working with one of your riders?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's really if I do something, I should get something for that, and we really put that onto our horses. Like you're saying, I'm doing this for him. He should give back to me. It's just
right.
not how.
Right. That's getting your own needs met. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And expecting it to be transactional in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
Which is another acculturated thing. Right.
Yeah.
How often does someone give a gift? Well, I'll talk about my family, right? So, my grandmother would send me a gift and I didn't call her or send a card right away. Let her back a thank you card. Hey, did you get that envelope the other?
Right.
Right. And it's subtle.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, I gave them something, but I need something in return. I did it. I did it to get something back.
I was just having a conversation about this. It was earlier today, even about the comments that get made in order to receive the thank you.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so much that way with our horses, right? Like that there is, and again, like you said, it's part of, we've been cultured into thinking that way, that it should be reciprocated or, whatever. I love, and I can't remember who said it. You may know it, Paul, but the quote about one of the biggest problems with communication is the assumption that it happened.
Yeah.
I think about that with our horses all the time, because it's like, well, who
Yeah.
actually gets to say that we communicated? Well, not us, but the receiver, the supposed receiver of that communication, right? And so then who gets to say that we were building confidence except for the supposed recipient of the confidence?
That's I mean, it's something that I think you told me for the first time like 8-9 years ago, Patrick, is the idea of presenting an idea or an aid and asking the question, what does this mean to you, versus do what I'm saying. And that's I think about that often, is that I can't just assume that makes sense to the horse. I can't put that on them. But when I come from a place of curiosity, I get so much feedback from that, and then I can shape the way I proceed. But that's also,
well, then it's a conversation, right? Instead of just a push this button, do this thing, it's a conversation.
But also to think that way, you kind of have to assume that your horse is not trying to spite you. Because that's another side of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's hard for people to let go of, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many asides.
We knew this whole thing was going to be an aside. We're supposed to talk about fear.
Well, we can.
I'm afraid what you're going to say.
So, was it last weekend I was away?
This last weekend.
Yeah, this last weekend. I was down at the Horses and Humans Research Foundation's annual research conference, and Stephen Peters talked, and what he gave 2 talks. One of them was on the importance of really valuing science and being wary of what he called pseudoscience, which I think is a really important thing for people to be aware of and to understand. In the second one was on the health. Is that, how do we promote health? And, in line with our conversation, it was about humans and horses. And you went this whole thing on human health. And then it was like, oh, by the way, it's all the same thing for the horses. In those talks, I don't remember where, he was talking about a responsibility in our language and how sensationalized, headlines can really end up hurting horses. And one of them was there's a I don't even know if the study was recent, but the story was recent. The one that horses are smarter than we thought they were. Something like that. And, the
one that makes it sound like, yes, he is out to get you. He's been plotting it for a week.
And that's what he says. So like, if you read the research, the researchers are very appropriate. They explain the task. They draw very minimal, conclusions from it, and that sort of stuff. But if what people walk away with is they're smarter than we thought they were, then it gives them permission, right, to do exactly what we're talking about, is make those assumptions that and aspire motivation and attribute things to the horses, which are just not true, right? It's just not real. So that's made me think of that.
So from your perspective, Paul, because I know coming from your field, particularly, I'm sure that you've got a lot of experience with the whole pseudoscience stuff. And I think that is something that we see a lot of it. And of course, I'm in the industry, right? In the silo, right? Kind of in the echo chamber, as it were. But it seems that particularly lately, there's a lot out there that that feels like pseudoscience, feels a little bit too feely and not enough. I think it's easy to make assumptions about horses when your number of horses, when your circle of influence or your experience is small enough. You can say, well, this must be the way that it is, right? And I feel like that happens. Well, I mean, I'm sure that it happens everywhere and in all industries, but I think that can be such a dangerous thing with horses and people, because there's such an opportunity to really get hurt
Right.
in situations like that. And I think it's one thing to hear about the story of, as Charles de Cunfee talks about riding Little Brownie, right? Like, I think it's one thing to hear about the stories of your experience with Little Brownie, but that doesn't mean that that's going to work for every horse out there, right?
Right.
And what's that line? The plural of anecdote is not data, right? It's like, just because you've got a couple stories together, that doesn't mean it's actually data.
That's good.
Absolutely.
So as a rider, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak? Because there seems to be a lot of just stuff out there that's not quite, wouldn't hold water, right? Wouldn't grow corn or whatever.
Yeah, I really want to be balanced in my approach to this, and I explain.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to Stephen Peters, and he brings up the whole thing of imprinting.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And imprinting was considered best practices,
mm-hmm.
right? There was never any research on it.
Mm.
It was best practices like forever. So now you can go and look on the Equitation Sciences book, and they go through all the research that we've done on it. It turns out that when you compare foals that are imprinted with those that are not, there's no difference in them, like 2 years down the road.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's not an advantage. And then there's data to suggest it's profoundly stressful. Basically, you're flooding an infant.
Depending on how you go about it,
right.
Sure.
If you did that to a human, we would consider them, traumatized for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm.
So that's an example of, even in acceptable practice, in large ways, it's never questioned. Someone in authority says it, and it seemed to work for them, and then we never questioned it. And then, and he brought up quotes in books where this is the best thing, and and it's propagated. So there are you don't even have to get to the kind of feely, weird stuff yet, right? You can go mainstream things that we just never studied, right? And
so just because it's popular doesn't mean it's right.
Exactly.
Drats.
So, one of the things that I learned early on, which I think is very important to remember, is that science is a method of exploring the world, right? The scientific method is one way of gathering knowledge and understanding of the world and the way that it works. Okay? We unfortunately live at an age where it's been deified, right? Science is not everything. And in fact, the more that we focus on science and don't understand that it's just an added piece to it, the more we run the risk of over-interpreting it and things like that. I mean, how many times have you heard coffee's bad for you? No, coffee's good for you. Oh, no, red wine's good for you. Oh, no, red wine's bad for you. Oh, no. It's like, and they're all come out of a study, right? A scientific study. And then we go. So there's a way in appreciating it, but not deifying it. And it would be we are more and more and more going to be, I think, the industry, specifically because of the challenges that we're facing in terms of, questions about social license and things of that sort, that we are going to be, there's going to be more and more and more and more research. Yeah. And for people in the industry, it's going to be in their interest to know how to read research. And you don't read research by looking on Instagram with someone that posted, this is a really cool study, and read their caption below it. Because
what if they have 1 million followers?
But they have 1 million followers.
Yeah. That's just because it's popular doesn't mean it's right. Okay. All right. I'm following.
So to read the research, you have to go to the research, right? And then what people do is they go and they read the abstract. Well,
Okay, sure.
so you read the summary, but that doesn't tell you the whole story, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Justin and I were talking about this week. It's like, okay, so the beginning of the research report should have a justification for why this is even an interesting question. And then it
Mm-hmm.
should have a description about what they do. And man, when you really look at what they're doing, that gives you a better sense of how meaningful this is in my world, right? And what
Right. Yeah, because that gives you
interpretations.
what perspective were they coming at this idea from, right? Like what was
Right.
their slant in the whole
Yeah.
process?
And
Yeah.
what horses did they study, and what situations, and what
Mm-hmm.
tasks and things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the part that the average person's going to need to trust them on, if it's a peer-reviewed journal, you can trust, is the data analysis, right? Because
Okay.
we were at one. I'll tell you a different story from the thing, but their results were, their data analysis was a logistical regression. So how many people know what a logistical regression is and how it works?
Right.
Right. I don't even know that, and I know some things about this stuff.
I was hoping you were
data,
going to explain it. Damn it! Now I've got to Google it.
well,
Surely there's an
can,
Instagram
He
influencer
can
that can tell me what
explain
that
it. He
means.
just
I
doesn't
can
know what
explain
it
it. I
is.
just don't understand it. And then there's this presentation of results, and then they draw conclusions from it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you're giving horses, like, a free choice task, they walk up and they can look at two pictures of people, and which way do they draw, which draws their gaze and which averts their gaze, or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
then they say, oh, you should never put on a mean face because your horse hates it, right? That's a conclusion that's way, way, way beyond the data.
Right.
So that's that side of it. I had a friend, unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. You would have loved him. His name was Joe Lancia. He was a psychiatrist. He was big in the developing equine assisted psychotherapy world. He was a shaman. He was he was out there. And he and I, from the time we met, we were fast friends. And I really didn't understand, why he wanted to be friends with this, like, hard science guy. Right? Because he's talking about how he was working on some things for me in the transpersonal world as he meditated. And and it's just like, oh, come on, Joe. But what Joe did for me is two things. First of all, it's just a reminder that there's so much of human experience that we have no understanding of, right?
Yeah.
And that and because of my science background, I was able to appreciate that doesn't mean that we won't know something, and that we shouldn't be asking questions about it, right? We're look what we're doing. We're on this magical thing, sending magical stuff across. I mean, you're sitting in, down in Natural Bridge, and we're up here in West Virginia, and all this stuff.
Right.
Nobody questions that. But there was a day when people kind of knew something weird was going on, but then they talked, well, maybe it's like the ether, and they talked about the ether, and they talked, right? That all of that science brought us along in understanding things in a way that now we're able to sit here on the computer and talk to each other. And I believe that true scientists are the ones that are really interested in living on that edge of what's known, and are curious and interested about what's not known. You know Grace Keaton. Love Grace. Her work on my horse was the only thing that for me had a noticeable impact and effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, so I think, okay, so she can come back and work on them again, and we'll keep doing that. And then I start doing double-blind studies. Like I
Okay.
do.
She's a good sport about this, by the way.
Oh, she loves it. We talk about
That's fantastic.
Good,
That's
right?
great. Yeah, that's great.
So something Nubble's tied to a hitching rail, and normally she just stands quietly. Something spooked her, and I know she pulled back. Now
Mm-hmm.
she's not lame. She's fine. She came off of that, but I know what happened. So the next time Grace comes, Guillaume, our friend Guillaume, was up helping out, and I said, Guillaume, would you bring Nubble up to work so Grace can work on her? Right? Don't say anything about anything. And he goes up and Grace works on her, and then I don't ask. I said, Guillaume, what did she say? He said, oh, she said something pretty good, but something was really fucked up in her pole on the right side, and she couldn't understand it because she had been feeling so good. Oh, right. So
yeah,
it's that kind of exploration on the edges. Can we get information and start to understand things in new and different ways? I made him take a course in the science of energy medicine when he was in high school.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I want, and the science thing, yeah, it's an important way of knowing and understanding the world. As one of my mentors used to say, to minimize the probability that we're lying to each other. And on the other side of it is that these things that are harder to understand, that are more, let's say, woo-woo or more out there stuff, that doesn't discount them. Right? We need to explore them and keep working on trying to understand them and learn about them, and to be able to, apply them to our lives and the lives in our relationships with our horses. If they're going to make our lives better, we just can't dismiss that stuff out of hand.
There you go. Yeah. I think that's a great way to think about it.
That's the short answer.
That's the short answer.
That's the short answer. Perfect. Good. I love it. We'll do another podcast for the long answer.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be one of those three-day clinics, right?
It'll be a documentary, not a podcast.
There we go. Perfect.
I think there's another piece of what you're saying, though, Patrick, about, and this is, not even talking research, is just the amount of information we have access to all the time through social media and whatever channels we use to communicate. And it like you were saying, if you have a very small group of horses that forms your understanding of what horses are, and then we're then flooded with these ideas that really, this is not research. These are we write posts, we promote that stuff. What we're doing is telling stories from our lives, and hopefully building we're using it as a tool for business. Let's be honest. We want to share and reach more people. But it's like, you take any one social media post that we or anybody else writes, that's a snapshot of how you're thinking about something that one day about one horse. And so it can get very confusing, if not dangerous, to try to follow all these ideas without context for our one or two horses. And I think, in terms of, you're asking about giving advice, I think the most important thing to do is to study in person, in some regard, with somebody who has experience. And that doesn't mean that whoever you pick to go study with isn't following norms that are right. But to have eyes on the ground and have guidance real time is it's I'm going to say impossible to replace. We can supplement, but can't replace.
Yeah.
Right. I think too, the things that you said in there that really nail it home for me is context and experience.
Yes.
Right. And I think that those two things, maybe not automatically, but often, you find those things changing together. The more experience we have, the broader maybe the context can be, or more specific, depending on what we're working on. I think about, at one point in my career, my experience was this. So my thoughts were inside of that. And then as that grows, I think about it. I probably say this every 5 or 10 years. Like if I think about the 5 or 10 year ago me, I don't know that I'd let him ride my horse today. But he was doing all right. He was teaching clinics. He was helping people. He was training horses. He was, and that's, I'm being pretty hard about that. But as we gain more experiences, that scope grows, and then the context can mean something completely different to us.
Yeah. And I think there's a piece of that it's like I've had the opportunity to ride with Tom and Trina Curtin a little bit. You were one of two people that recommended I reach out to them at the same time in the same week, and I was like, okay, that's. So a couple of years ago, I reached out and I went and spent a week out there with them, and then I've gone back and ride with some clinics. So it's very minimal, but I've got a ton of insight from just talking with them and riding with them. And one of the things that Tom told me early, like when I first met him, was first, just go and ride as many horses as possible. Yeah. And second was, don't be afraid to make a mess of things. And the reality is, if you only have, one horse every 20 years, you go make a mess of things, and
it's a mess.
It's a mess.
It's a mess.
I know.
But the reality, and it's just few people have the opportunity to have this amount of time with horses, but it's 8 horses a day, 6 days a week, all year for years. You can make a mess of things, and a week later it's cleaned up. Or what, depending on what it is, and that stuck with me. A quick story about riding with Tom. I took my horse, that little Cola, my Nakota, out to visit with them last year in Oklahoma and ride for a week. And it was, our first day was a horrible experience. It was like 7 degrees out, and I hadn't spent much time with cattle before, and so we ended up a very long day that was an absolute mess. And I was sitting out in his stall, or near his stall, sitting on a bale of hay, feeling very sorry for myself. And Tom came marching around a corner. He's like, "How's it going?" I was like, "Oh, wasn't that happy about the way the day went." And he's like, "All right." Said, "Kind of like to sort that out so it doesn't happen that way again." "All right." I was like, "Could you help me figure out what to do about that?" He's like, "Yeah, that's what tomorrow's for." He walked away.
That's great. That's great.
And that, that plays through my head every other day, because there's just, I make messes like crazy. And in the past, I've had this feeling of like, got to clean it up right now, or else my horse is ruined forever. And then 2-hour fight later, and nobody's won that. And, and I think about that all the time. If I make a mess bad enough that I'm not going to dig, I've dug a hole I can't get out of, that's what tomorrow's for.
There you go.
Unless, this is there's a trend here, because wise people keep telling me very similar things, but
there's probably something to that.
There might be something to that, but that, so.
But we haven't studied it yet.
We haven't studied it. I say all that just to point out that there's irreplaceable value in building the experience through experiences. You have to just have experiences. And that's, how do you replace that if you can't if you're limited with your horse? And we think about this a lot, but it's, one of the things that Paul recommends folks when they're wanting to get help getting back on their horse after fall or work through some fear or something like that is use one of ours, or go find a schoolmaster and take lessons and just ride. Get back in the saddle, find your balance, go ride somebody else's horse for a few months, go as much as possible. And then when your horse is ready, we'll work with you to get going together again. But that's just the time,
Yeah. For sure. And there's another side to this, which is about all this information that's out there. So you're talking about it from, the trainer perspective. And, one of the things that I see, and it kind of gets back to the silos, right? In the way so much of the horse industry is organized. I mean, how do people learn to ride? I can tell you how I did. My mom didn't want to take me to Mickey Way because she had a reputation of being a bit salty and hard on her students. So she took me to this nice lady at this hunter jumper barn she heard about, right? My mom doesn't know anything about horses, right? She just wanted to find someone who is nice. So now I'm a hunter jumper rider. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
By default.
And what's my experience? Well, we ride around in a ring and then we jump over these little jumps. Okay. Then what do? Then we go to shows. Right. And then we run around the ring and jump over jumps. And if there's less than 6 people in the class, I come home with a ribbon. So, in obviously, I mean, on the East Coast, I'm working with a lot more English riders. But I think it's probably the same within the Western disciplines. If you grow up within a discipline, right? That's what you know now. And then how do you take in all of this information? It may be important information that you discount, that you don't even learn about, or doesn't make any sense. I mean, how many times have I harshly judged something because, oh, that's bullshit, right? That's like, this, and what am I doing? I'm just protecting what I know, right? And my experience.
Yeah.
So I think there's an issue for the riders, and it is actually with a lot of anxious or fearful riders, particularly kids. One of my primary recommendations: go learn something about horses you know nothing about. If you don't know anything about natural horsemanship or vaquero style horsemanship, don't know anything about groundwork, don't know anything about liberty, don't know anything about Western, don't know anything about working equitation. Just go do something different. And just learning that there's something to learn. Right. It's so empowering to people to get them off of that idea that somehow they've know. And I was in that spot the first time I almost got killed. I'd been riding 30 years, and I'd just been doing my hunter jumper hunt seat stuff, and I was a reasonably good rider, and that was the limit of my knowledge. So anytime I had a problem, I doubled down on what I knew.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
So
right.
So I think that idea of having all that information out there, it lands on a context, right? A personal context. And I think in the industry, it would be wonderful to support programs that when kids came in, right, they got exposure to the stuff that we had to spend our whole lifetime spreading out our experience to find it. Well, why not give them that, right, up front? Why not give them that variety? Why not give them that broad base of experience?
Yeah, start with that broader horizon. Yeah.
And then they want to specialize later. They want to become a neurosurgeon in the horse world, right? They can pick their specialty and they can go down that road later on, but from a very different space.
Yeah. Cool. Very good. So with those thoughts, let's bridge that into working with riders with fear.
We have to talk about what we're supposed to talk about.
So we're gonna. We don't have to. We don't have to.
So if we ever do this
we
again,
talk about whatever we want to talk about, right?
Right. If we ever do this again, we'll make a concerted effort to keep you off the topic of choice. We'll see how long you can steer.
You mean you haven't already?
Oh, we weren't trying.
That's funny.
He loves to say, let's just play jazz, you know.
Yes.
What's the plan today? What's the plan in today's clinic? Well, let's just play jazz. Some of us don't play jazz.
That was a great story. We presented at the EAL Summit, the Equine Assisted Learning Summit, and our presentation, believe it or not, was on the application of complex systems theory to equine assisted learning activities.
Okay.
And there's this other program, Natural Lifemanship. Tim Job, who's an old cowboy, and his son Tanner are there, and they do presentations all the time. And Justin and I are walking towards the ring, and what did you say? You asked.
Well, so what are we talking about?
And
I don't know what you want to talk about.
And behind us, Tim is cracking up because it's exactly what happens when they walk into the ring. So, so you want to talk about the F word? I understand.
I want to talk about the F word a little. Yeah, I want to talk about the F word a little, and I want to bridge it to because and the reason why I want to talk about it is because we've got the two of you in the collaboration side of things, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about fear, we talk about fear in the person, we talk about fear in the horse, we talk about fear in that partnership between the two, right? In that combination. So it's not just it's more than even just a two-sided coin, right? Mm-hmm. Because then we've got that combination when they come together. So how do you guys go about? No, see, I'm rephrasing my question in my head here as we go. How would each of you describe fear? Paul, in the rider, like what is fear in the rider? And Justin, what is fear in the horse?
I'll start by saying, Patrick, if you're feeling afraid, there's one thing to do.
It's for good reason.
Is that if you're having a feeling...
You got too serious. I knew there was going to be something silly.
Well, let me get it out. If you're feeling afraid, don't feel that way anymore.
Just stop it.
Just stop it.
Just stop it. And thanks, Bob. Just stop it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, glad you know the video.
For anybody listening, if you don't know the Bob Newhart skit, Just Stop It. You have to look it up on YouTube. It's great.
Yes, and watch it. It's fabulous. Be cured in 3 minutes. Yeah. Save you lots of money.
And if they don't look it up, we're going to bury them alive in a box, right? You'll get it if you look up the video.
You want to start with that? What's fear?
Why don't you start with the horses? Because then I can... Because I always start.
Well, I got to think about it.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
Yeah. That's what I said.
So and I was going to joke, and answer it. Well, it depends, but it really does depend. And the reality is, when we say, okay, we're addressing fear, it could be any number of things.
Yeah, that's
right?
a pretty good way to start. That's why I was so struggling getting off the ground.
It's so much easier.
Yeah, what he said.
It's so much easier, right, to sit and talk to somebody and in their presence and in the presence of their own horses begin to answer, try to answer the question, what is fear for you? Right? And where does that live inside of you and what is that about? one of the things that we have become unapologetic about, I used to be apologetic about, is being a neuroscience geek and wanting to educate people on how their nervous systems work. Right?
Yeah.
So, in I mentioned, polyvagal theory, I mentioned affective neuroscience. There are circuits in our brain that are that if you stimulate that area of the brain, you feel afraid. If you stimulate a different area of the brain, you feel panicked and anxious. If you stimulate a different area of the brain, you feel enraged. If you stimulate a different area of the brain, you feel playful. If you stimulate a different area of the brain, you feel care and compassion, right? So these are areas of the brain which are primary circuitry. And if you want to think of things that are inherited, right, or genetically encoded, I mean, this is part of our core basic neurology. So one of the things that's really important to appreciate is we've been sold a bill of goods since the 70s that our big brains are really, the source of everything, right? Cognitive science, and everything starts with your thoughts and it works its way down into your system, right? And what do people tell you to do, right? It's like, when they say deal with your fear, well, what do? We do mental skills training. Well, I'm not saying that there isn't any value in mental skills training, although the research is pretty equivocal on whether or not it increases performance, unless that's changed since I read it last. But the idea of being able to think our way through it and have it feed down to our core nervous system, very inefficient. So one of the things to appreciate is that some of our reactions are coming from these basic core circuits. And what that means is if those basic circuits are activated, then we need to deal with it in a particular way, which would be more like we would deal with our horses. Right? We need to desensitize those fear circuits and desensitize the panic circuitry, and we need to break if there are conditioned stimuli which kick these things off. We need to work on extinguishing those conditioned stimuli and things like that.
I can take it into thresholds.
Yeah, you want to do so, and that world is where we get into this world of, we talk about working within the thresholds, and I'll let him talk about that.
So is this something like kind of the successive approximation sort of idea? Is that what we're talking about when you're...
Well, the stuff that you did with Phil, that taught him to do with Philadelphia, like the CAT-H stuff is a really good example of that stuff. And do you know about the CAT? You do, because you taught it to him.
Educate me. So it's actually funny. I'm so glad that you said that, because that's something CAT-H I've heard. We hear Warwick Schiller talk about it, and then and if I understand it correctly, it was somebody told him he was using it, and he's like, I don't know. Okay, great, yeah, I'm using it. And then somebody told him he's using it wrong, and he's like, I didn't know I was using it in the first place, right?
Right.
So I've never researched it to know to describe to know what it is. So talk to me about what it is.
So let Justin let him talk about the way we think about thresholds, and then we'll circle back and answer that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with our horses, we come across these moments that things explode, and that's typically when someone like me gets a phone call. Where
you mean you get a phone call and your horse explodes?
That's exactly every single time. But so the way we look at this is that in the escalation of the fear response, there's two thresholds that get crossed. There's two lines that and it's the same for us as well as our horses. But there's the initial threshold. Under we can call it the comfort zone or whatever, where there's no activation.
Okay.
And let's say the tarp in the corner of the arena starts to blow around in the wind, and our horse looks up and notices that, head in the air, tight in the body. And that's we call it the first threshold. It's the threat detection threshold. So that's the nervous system notices there's a problem. And then beyond that, if let's say the stimulus escalates, the flag blows up into your horse's face, or the tarp blows around the arena, or
you push your horse.
Right. Right.
One of those objects goes closer to the other one, right?
Right. We can hit the second threshold, which tips us into a state of panic.
Okay.
In between those thresholds is called the window of tolerance. So when we're talking about stepping out of our comfort zone to grow, if we step out of our comfort zone into the window of tolerance, we have the potential of growth. If we step too far across the second threshold into panic, we cannot grow. So there's this, when we're talking about the Cat H stuff, we can ride a line. And this is what, Dad's talking about with Philadelphia when I brought her down to you is, so, and I'll tell that story. We had have a rescue mare we adopted, and she was really, really bothered about people. So what did we do? We brought her into a stall, and I mean, it started outside of the stall. We began to open the door, and her whole body tense, plastered up against the back wall. And what we did is waited until she softened, and then took a step back. So what she goes into that, now she's beyond the first threshold. She's tense and there's a threat. She's not trying to climb out the window yet. She's not
full into the panic mode.
Right. She's not trying to kick us out of the stall. She's not trying to climb out the window. She's not panicked, but she's in that threat has been detected. She's in the window of tolerance. So when we wait for that activation to come back down and then take a step back, what we've done is moved that threshold or expanded the window of tolerance. One or the other. Right. So, and this is when, I hear, I never met Ray Hunt, but I hear folks talk about him, and I can't remember, it might've been you that told me this idea that he talked about riding the edge of trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. So and he would refer to it in different ways. He would say, ride the line, right? Or stay at the edge, go to the edge of trouble. Yeah.
And in the way, and without having witnessed what he was actually doing and talking about, in my mind, where we have the greatest potential for growth is kind of at the further edge of our window of tolerance, where we're not crossed into panic, but we're stretching. And that's, to me, that's how I kind of think about that. Tom Curtin talks about it's okay to have a little concern in your horse, but it's not okay for them to be bothered. These are just arbitrary. This is just language that's being used.
Right.
But you see in these ideas, you see two lines. And that, so what we can do to grow that window of tolerance is we can find these lines, wait for them to dissolve. And then the key is that we step back into comfort, back into safety.
And that's where most people, so I'm not an expert on Cat H, and this is my interpretation of it. And there's a lot of different ways you could talk about it. But in the description that Justin's using is we're basically training a relaxation response to a previously threatening stimulus.
Okay.
Right. Now, is that an extinguishing protocol in behavioral language, or is it learning something new? I forget the official behavioral language. So all the behaviorists out there, please be kind. But that, this where people get in trouble, both with their horses and with themselves, is that they cross over that threshold, first threshold, and let's say they avoid crossing the second threshold, and then they're successful. What do they immediately do? Well, let's go a little farther.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you use that approach of always going a little farther, then what you're doing is you're stacking.
Gotcha. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So you're much more likely, well, first of all, you're much more likely to blow over the second threshold because if you think of all of us have like a worry bucket, right? And you're just filling that puppy up, and then one of those things is going to make it overflow. Right? So you impact or reduce your resilience in that moment. And then the other thing is you don't grow, because the next time you come back to it, you've got all of this angst stacked up that is your expectation. So we've had a number of riders who literally were terrified to mount their horses. Now and this is where, I may not beat him in working equitation, but I would take putting a terrified rider on my mare over his gelding any day. So I know I did something right. But it typically has taken us somewhere between 20 minutes and somewhere around a half hour to get someone who has been struggling for months just getting on a horse because they're absolutely terrified. I can get them on a horse in no time.
Mm-hmm. Not just throwing that, like,
right. In using
actually going through the process of getting them comfortable with the idea.
Process and using this system. And people, once they understand that you challenge yourself, and then as your system starts to settle, then you can reward yourself by going back into your comfort zone and not rush on to the next step. And then, so there's a couple things that people typically miss. So first thing they miss, the first thing, which is my complaint about the whole you can't grow in your comfort zone thing. There's two kinds of comfort, right? You have to be comfortable in order to grow. You have to feel safe and secure enough in order to challenge yourself to step out of your comfort zone, so to speak. And that's the first thing that people miss, is that they don't make sure that they are connected and safe and well regulated.
Gotcha.
Right? And that comes from their connection and relationship to any number of things, the person working with them, the horse, the community that's around them, whatever that happens to be. That's the first thing people miss. Second thing they miss is they miss the first threshold. So almost to a person, whenever I talk about it, people would be more than happy to walk up to the top block of the mounting block, at which point they would be dissociating, or they would be shaking and tremors and things of that sort. You ask them the question, well, where do you first get nervous? Oh, when I looked at the mounting block. Or when you said, okay, let's, right?
Right.
So
when I put my boots on this morning, or
right, exactly.
Wherever that space is.
Wherever it is. And that's where you start. So, it might be just like look over at the mounting block with the intention of stepping onto that first step. And then
but still being maybe across the arena.
Could be across the arena. Typically when we're working, it's usually 10 feet away, with me, me standing with them, providing that source of connection and security, and I'm engaging them, right? In very, positive, warm ways, doing my best to introduce some humor and having a good time with it. And let them at least first get to the place where they can look at the mounting block without elevating up to a 6 or 7 on a scale of 10. and then they can, well, then maybe usually what happens is the first few steps are slow, right? And then they come
Sure.
back. And then once they're up, like on the second step of the mounting block, it's easier for them to get up. And once they're up there, usually getting on the horse is not such a big deal. Sometimes it is, but usually that's not the problem. It's getting to that point, right? It's super interesting how that goes. But that idea of honoring the way our nervous system works and working on addressing those kind of core primary affective circuits by using this method where you're stepping, across that first threshold, waiting until your system begins to settle, and then rewarding yourself by stepping back, you can really skyrocket your progress. And of course, the challenge for people, if they're not in a clinic with us, is, what's the culture? Oh, get on the horse already, will you?
Right.
I'm not going to sit around with you all day. And this, you think this is frustrating for an instructor. Well, what about, how do I get them, if they're afraid to trot? Or how do I get them afraid to canter, right? And and there are, equivalents of this method that we can apply along the way.
So what you're talking about really, and again, I'm just thinking about this as you're sharing this, but it sounds like what you're talking about is stacking success instead of stacking the triggers.
Exactly.
Right. And do you feel like that's what helps to build that momentum, that then it's like, yeah, of course I can climb on the horse, right? Or get to that third step on the block. Yeah.
Absolutely. There was something that I thought in it. Just talking about, I'm going to throw it back to him to talk about the horses, but there are, there are other things which we could talk about in terms of fear, which is about, threat to our sense of self, threat to our esteem, that kind of, social embarrassment, self-criticism. I mean, there's
threat to our story, right?
Yeah. So the fear that it does arise from these, this kind of crazy, prefrontal cortex that is making up all kinds of crap about stuff, right? And that may mean using a different approach, right? Which is different. And then the third thing is someone who is, has suffered, real trauma, like people who have PTSD, on their horses. And then there's a whole host of integrated techniques that we can use to help them. It would involve some of these basic things, but we would want to include a lot of other stuff in terms of helping them, integrate their experience in a way that they can function again. So it's not all fears the same. Not anxiety, and some is about physical threat. Some of it is about trauma. Some of it's about these primary affective circuits getting banged off. Some of it's about our big brains doing their crazy stuff. So it's really important to appreciate that it's not one simple thing.
Yeah. Well, that makes it sound so much easier to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just stop it.
I work with nervous
Stop it.
Just stop it.
Just stop. That's fascinating, really, to think about it coming from all of those other places.
Yeah.
Right. Is it because, well, like you said, the clinic situation, is it because, I'm worried about how somebody else is going to look and think about me in this situation? Or is it that I'm actually scared for my life because of the physical threat, like what you're talking about,
right? There's all kinds of different things that people do to scare themselves.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that certainly makes the rider's fear more complex, right, than the horse's fear, because the horses don't tend to have the same
layers,
stories.
Stories. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, they're not worried what Sally thinks. They're just doing their thing. Right. They're more on the survivalistic side of it.
Yeah. I think when thinking about the horses, the toughest thing, we talk a lot about building regulation, ability for the horse's nervous system to go up and then come back down.
Okay.
And I mean, I was talking about this just yesterday. I had a horse here this winter, really cool, really fun, off the track thoroughbred, but it's just every little thing that happens is the one drop that overflows the bucket. Yeah. So it was the kind of thing that I mean, he was here for 3 months. We spent the first 2 mostly on the ground, kind of a Groundhog Day situation, really. And then I had a horse that came in last week, and he's 3.5, and he's happy out in the field alone. He's happy in the barn. He leads well. He sees people in a positive light. He was here for 2 days before I put a first ride on. Second ride, walk, track, canter. Tomorrow we'll be outside. It's just the differences in the horses. So it's not a teachability, trainability issue. It's a regulation issue. It's can the horse be in these different contexts? And so what happens is that it's the hardest thing to deal with is that the horses, that their window of tolerance is pencil thin. So the moment threat is detected, you're just an inch away from blowing up. And the tough thing is to approach in the beginning. It's often necessary to slow down to the point of really addressing that first threshold very mindfully. And then we need to talk about how once that window has grown, can we practice bringing the energy up? Because that's, I think, a lot of times folks are looking for relaxation from their horses, from almost that, pothead on the couch kind of total slump relaxation.
Yeah, exactly.
Little Joe today.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Trying to do in-hand work with my runaway horse, right? So I'm lifting him up and asking him to balance, and he's going.
A little too relaxed, right?
A little too relaxed.
Right. So we're far away from that first threshold, but what do we have to work with with that horse? And so there becomes this. So then we have to talk about activation, regulated activation, that like athletic relaxation, where we can be active. And it's I don't like using the word relaxation in this context, but I feel like there's a better word. But so I think we can get stuck looking to deactivate and bring things back down every time we hit that first threshold if we stay there, because then we never get where the horse really has the ability to come back down from that energy. So
and this connects really closely with the people. So now we're in the world of polyvagal theory.
Okay.
And so first of all, I am not a neuropsychologist. I am not a neurologist. So I apologize to all those experts out there that I will offend. But so what Justin's talking about, and this we've run into this with a number of clients, is that they have this sense, even for themselves, that they want to be totally calm and chill and relaxed. And what we find is if you stay there, if you keep going back to that, it's really hard to make any progress. And even in the world of polyvagal stuff. So the polyvagal theory is that there's a for people who don't know, there's a system in your brain. It's in the front of the brainstem. Therefore, it's called the ventral vagal system, right? It's in front, okay? And it's connected to and innervated by cranial nerves. Diaphragm up is the easiest way to say that, which in most of that innervation is all the stuff that we use to connect. So in a physical and nervous system way, it's really our social connection system. Okay? And what it does is, and this is where there's some controversy, is that it is like, I like to talk about it in the way that I understood it. I thought that Steve Porges was talking about a tractor, and he's got the polyvagal system is the guy driving the tractor or gal driving the tractor. And you know how the tractor brake has a little clip, and you unclip that, and there's a right one and a left one, right? And you can stop the right tire, help you turn in mud. You can stop the left one. Well, if you think of that, the ventrovagal system that way, that you have one brake on the sympathetic nervous system and one brake on the parasympathetic. Now, the way people talk about it, they still talk about sympathetic, parasympathetic as like one's on, the other one's off. The other one's on.
Yeah, like as if they're totally separate and don't interplay, right? They don't collaborate.
It makes me crazy that people do that, because
it has a good and bad feel.
Yeah.
We put, parasympathetic good, sympathetic bad.
So and just as Justin was saying, we want our horses to be activated with relaxation. We want them, we want the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems to activate a certain amount, right? And we can balance that out. It's not like one on, one off. Yeah. So with people, what we first have to do is they have to be regulated. So with our horses, you can't have the horse as a kite the whole time. You're trying to do groundwork. Okay, so you have to teach that horse to regulate, and you have to work on that basic regulation. Find relaxation, find appropriate parasympathetic activation. Okay. With people, you can't have them dissociating while they're riding. I had a rider once who would jump into a line of jumps, and if it was a line, she'd jump in and then she would dissociate and fall off.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's not really safe.
Right? No.
It's really not safe.
No.
Right. So first they have to be able to regulate, but then that's where a lot of people stop. They think their progress is going to come from that. And we had a clinic, and it was with a woman we had worked with on and off for years. And I had this like lightning bolt moment, right? Because she was always wanting to, she'd get like uptight, she'd wait, and she'd have to stop, and then she'd bring herself down. Well, she's really good at that. And I remember one day I said, you can regulate yourself, ride.
Yeah.
And that's where we sort of came to this idea that it's like, once you're regulated well enough, then it's time to practice. Then it's time to move. Then it's time to be in that window of tolerance. Then it's time, because that's where your growth is going to occur. So this is like, obviously basic core regulation is first, and then you got to work on being regulated in that more activated space.
And I think maybe a good way to think about this is that if what we're dealing with is really acute, and the window of tolerance is very small, we need to hit that first threshold and wait there. But then comes a place where you step beyond the first threshold, you're in the window of tolerance, you are uncomfortable, and that's where the work starts to happen. And that makes sense. It really tracks very, very well with the horses. But if you have one that just every little thing tips them over the edge and they're gone, there's no value in bringing the energy up intentionally. Right. Otherwise, you're just blowing your horse up on purpose and flooding.
Right.
In that.
Right, and they're not even able to engage in the conversation.
No.
Right,
no.
and if we did that to a person, right, I'd be brought up on charges for being some sadistic, gross incompetence,
or you'd just be called a riding instructor.
Do it now.
Yeah.
More leg. Yeah, absolutely. Heels down. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's the beauty of grounding this stuff. And you talked about grounding this stuff in this shared neurology, right? It's the underlying dynamics are the same, and it helps people understand their horses, and it helps people really understand themselves, and it gives us a way of really being progressive with people and being able to move them forward, knowing that, the first time they come to a clinic, maybe we're just dealing on that basic sense of regulation.
We really hit a point. Same for me. Same with the horses, where it's like, wait a minute. Now we've worked on finding that first threshold and coming back down so many times, and then between these clinics, I'm starting colts that are going on to be very high performing show jumpers. So I'm not just sitting in the arena bringing it down. We're moving. We're
right.
We started to think, there's another step. There's another piece to this, because we need to be able to function with energy.
Right. And and you think about the world of horses, right? You look at the training scale. You look at what they're doing with these quarter horses. Out working cows on the third ride. It's like every one of them is searching for that relaxation and activation. Right?
Yeah. That makes me think of what Charles de Kunfi talks about. We're not riding the horse; we're shaping his energies. Right, and that especially when you're talking about that regulation and riding the wave, and can we get both sides of that tractor brake engaged? Can we play the fluctuation of that? That to me makes perfect sense, because if we work so much on that zero tension, right, that complete relaxation on the not useful side of relaxation, right, versus athletic relaxation. And it's funny that you mentioned that, Justin, because I just posted a blog post today that's a repost of a video where I talked about athletic relaxation. So that's cool that popped up like that. But that idea of, can we handle doing something with this? Right. And of course it makes sense if the horse is at an energetic standpoint where, you're trying to be still and they're like a ping pong ball. If the energy's all over the place, if they're vibrating while you're trying to be still, that's a different thing. But then, when we talk about stillness, I suppose we could carry that into movement, couldn't we? Right. Because stillness, standing and standing still are two different things. Right. Yeah. So maybe that horse is standing and he's more like a puddle that just hasn't collapsed to the floor yet. Right. Versus he can be still mentally, but perform at a high degree. Right. Because you're able to carry that and regulate those energies with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
It's a nice framework. It's a nice way of thinking, and I find this concept has helped a lot of folks just to explain what's going on with themselves or with their horses, and we keep going back to that. That we talk a lot about these things in our Fresh Start clinics, and it really, this is not just fear and anxiety. This is function. This is
function. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We need these things working well in order to go do stuff. So it's really, that's where those clinics, to me, don't feel like they're focused on fear. They feel like they're focused on fundamentals, just all around.
So this is a frustration of mine. I have never been able to sell anything if I marketed wellness. If I say, come to this talk on wellness, nobody, for your child, deal with their behavioral problems, right? Let's go, right?
Yeah, right.
If we say, come to this fear clinic, well, it's going to draw people, and most people have anxiety and fear, right? But really what we're talking about is core wellness. We're talking about
functional systems.
Talking about and we go back to what we said, connection, integration, communication.
Right? Yeah.
So you had asked about the rider and the horse. Clearly, in situations. There are situations where certain riders, in where they are in their regulation and emotional experience, are not appropriate for certain horses given their level of regulation and emotional experience. It's just bad.
It's that
thinking.
clash of energies. Yeah.
Clash of energy, and I'll have to think about what percentage of people come to us and have the source of their anxiety has been from accidents or experiences where they've been overhorsed, where they've been on a horse that's not appropriate for their level of motivation, skill, ability,
for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
For lots of different reasons.
So, so there is a piece which is, it makes sense to, put yourself in a situation where you can be successful with a horse that, that can tolerate, the energy in your activation. Right. So there are therapists, that I know that don't work with certain patients, certain clients, because the client's emotional concerns and issues make them anxious.
Oh, sure. Right. Yeah, you're not going to be effective that way. You're not going to be helpful.
Right. You can't be effective. Yeah. Absolutely. If I have it, and for me, I'm all up in my head. Things need to make sense. So
he's a brick.
When someone comes in and they're psychotic, that really wigs me out a little bit. Right? It's a client who deserves treatment and deserves good treatment. And they're not going to get it from me because my being wigged out by the fact that they don't make any sense is not helpful to them.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come in with almost anything else. It's like, okay, let's go, right? Let's figure it out. Let's work on it. So there's very few things other than that get me charged up. So with a rider and a horse, there is going to be a match, especially during the recovery phase, right? There has to be at least a good enough match so that someone's not re-traumatized early in the process of finding, the confidence of working through their fear. And that's really, really important. Have you ever, this is just my perception, never been studied before, by the way. You have a horse who's, a little bit spicy, right? When you ride them, and then you like throw a 4-year-old on them and they're like, okay. There are horses that happens with riders. My mare is that way.
They come with babysitter mode pre-installed.
Right. Yeah. And you put an anxious rider there and she'll stand there and she won't move her feet and she'll just hang out.
My horse, on the other hand, the one time I role played an anxious rider, he crawled out of his skin.
Good thing it was just role playing and not the actual thing, right? That would go, right, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there is an appreciation, for horses that bring that capacity and ability and that level of regulation and understanding, that the anxiety of the rider doesn't communicate danger to the horse. Getting back to your idea about, waiting to see what it means, right? And that's been a really important piece is to know that your horse does not take in the rider's anxiety as a threat to them.
Right. It's what the actions that come from the anxiety build the anxiety in the horse. But so often you hear my horse is anxious because I'm anxious. And they really tend to have a really incredible tolerance for our emotions, as long as we're not acting on them in a way that is upsetting and confusing. Right.
Yeah. But it makes me think again to when you were talking about, the currency, right? And it's like, well, there's that bank account, right? Are we making deposits or are we pulling withdrawals?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think with the riders, I mean, once they gain their confidence and once they are, better regulated and better integrated in their behavior and in their thinking, they're not locked down in their thinking. They're not locked down in a negative emotion. They're not locked up physically or spasmodic physically. Once once they're better regulated, then you start making the choices in terms of pairing with their horses that's based on what's their level of ability and their interest and what they want to do, and then you can kind of up the ante from there. And we loosely partner. I have a short list of 3 or 4 people in the region who do really well, have great lesson horses. And so if someone comes to me, I might work with them, 3 or 4 or 5 sessions on one of mine. I said, look, now you got to go and, you got to go and here's these people and they're really, skilled teachers. They have well-trained horses. They'll take good care of you and go ride your pants off.
That's fantastic. And that makes me think of the course or clinic that you guys were presenting, right? The clinic for teaching trainers to understand emotions. Is that how that went? Or talk to me about that.
Do you want to talk about it?
This course was born out of a talk that he gave at the USEA instructor training program. Do you remember this? That when I was down there riding with you and I had an outline that I showed you in the kitchen?
I do.
So that's the outline. So that we took his talk and that became 2 one-day courses. And that's so that's is all geared around helping riding instructors understand their students' emotions, give strategies to diffuse, work through those emotions, as well as skills and strategies and best practices for teaching, for how to communicate.
Right.
So this is a lot about. This is not about what to teach. This is not horsemanship related. These are as void as possible of opinions about what they're teaching. This is about how to teach the rider in a way that's best for their rider. So we've done this a couple times now in person, and it's really, well, I'll say one thing. You can go into more detail about the course, but one thing that's really exciting to me is being able to sit down with a group of people who are in all these different silos, so different disciplines, and connect over the same goal of we just want to get better for our students. And but that's a huge need that we see in the industry is that folks are like me, all you ever wanted to do is ride horses. So you start riding horses and then you realize you make a lot more money per hour and it's a lot safer to teach a lesson than it is to ride a horse. And so now you're a teacher. When did the education happen? Well, it happened when you were a kid getting yelled at by, that.
Yep.
So we end up as instructors now, we end up modeling the way we teach off of wherever we came from, and so there's this incredible need, especially because we don't have regulations as far as who can teach riding.
And even if and I'm not throwing USCA under the bus, because I think they've done a really good job with their it's now their eventing coaches program.
Yeah,
but
they have some of the best continuing ed out of any of the organizations.
But it's the vast majority. I have the manual, and the vast majority of the manual is on what you teach at what level when. Right? What are the skills that the rider needs? What are the abilities the horse has to have? What are the exercises which are appropriate for that level? And that's important information. And then there's 2 pages on the coaching part that has to do with their students.
Yeah.
Thank God they put in those 2 pages, right? Absolutely, they need to have, say, hey, who your students are, and this kind of art of teaching is really important, right? But
at least there's a stepping stone of those 2 pages.
Right, there's a stepping stone, and what we're trying to do is fill that gap and provide people good information. So we decided just to start with what people complain about most, which is that it's really hard because your students like sitting in the corner of the arena dissolved in tears, or this one's screaming at their horse, or this one's having a panic attack, or this one's, and riding really brings out these strong emotions in people, and especially with kids who have limited capacity to regulate themselves anyway. Right. So our first course is emotions in the arena. The funny thing is we always start pretty much in the same place. So all the stuff we talked about the nervous system and that, we start there, because if you understand how the nervous system works, then you understand the levers you get to play with.
Gotcha. Yep.
And then you put that into context, and we talk about we talk about the different emotions and how to approach them, how to build, and support the growth of regulation, and, things you can teach your students to help them develop, their skills and those kinds of strategies. The second course is basically a short course in pedagogy and on the science of teaching. So, with the second course, we're talking about, creating optimal learning environments. We're talking about, good teaching strategies. We're talking about psychological safety. We're talking, that people can then think about their teaching, multisensory teaching. How do kids learn? People learn, and how do different people learn differently? And what does that mean for how you want to present stuff in a world where, I would say 98.2% of all riding instruction is orally presented.
Yeah.
Well, what if you don't process information that way?
Right.
It's
exactly.
like trying to train your horse by talking to them. It's like, so we're really excited about these things, and we're just at the beginning. We've got these 2-day clinics. We really want to invest in creating a body of resources for teachers that is both. It's both helpful for them, because when you have tools and you have ideas and you have things you can work on, and you can build your skill as a teacher, it's more fun to teach. The other thing that happens is you actually have better student retention.
Yeah. Right.
And
Exactly.
you may find yourself interested in and attracting a broader range of students. So, maybe you're not, like, for me, I love teaching, like 10 to 13-year-olds. These middle school age kids.
They make me want to cry.
They're just so much fun for me. But maybe I could also teach high school kids, or maybe I could also teach, people who are older and things like that. And then the obvious.
Justin's got trauma with that age group, right? I remember hearing stories in the past about that. Yeah, that's funny. That's funny.
There's no group scarier to me in the entire world than a 13-year-old girl. I'm sorry.
Yep.
And then, and then there's the obvious advantages to the students, right? If they have instructors who are really going to help them grow in their regulation, and their riding skill is going to advance quicker. And then I think, we want to support the industry in terms of its professionalism and its respect for the dignity of the horses and the riders. Right. And this is our way. This is the way that, given who we are and what we know how to do, we can do. So that's where we're at with that stuff.
I love that, for the dignity of the horses and the riders. That's so important.
Someone should write that down, maybe.
That's one of our core values. Did you not read our core values? It's one of the 7. We were told we have too many values.
You have too many values.
That's a true
I hate
story.
when that happens.
We were told that we should bring it down to distill it to 3. We have too many core values.
Oh. So throw the other values out the window? Don't value them anymore?
No, we've just consolidated them, so it's 3, where it's like, respect for the horse and rider, compassion and empathy. There's just a bunch of, now they're just a long list.
So you've got 3 core values that are really run-on sentences. Then. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And
the other thing is, we were told that some of our values just should be assumed, but I don't think they knew the horse industry. Right?
That's a whole other podcast, isn't it?
Well, and it's not casting a whole negative aspersion in the industry. There's fabulous people in the industry, right? It's
Absolutely.
just that it's you just can't assume.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And I did.
Right.
Yeah.
It just leaves too much open to chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I want to respect you guys' time. So talking about the Fresh Start Clinic.
Patrick.
It is past your bedtime. Okay. Well, I mean, hey. Talking about the Fresh Start clinics and talking about the teacher training clinics. How do people find out more about those if they're interested in learning more?
They can find us on Facebook, Riding Far LLC, Facebook and Instagram, and then our website is ridingfar.com.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
They can find out about stuff there, and the other thing is, our contact information is there.
Yeah. They can absolutely reach out to us.
Yeah, we are happy to talk to people.
Reach out to him, because I take a little while.
Well, I get all the emails anyway.
Right.
There you go. Perfect. Good deal.
Yeah.
So some wrap-up questions then as we go into this. If you could say, because we've got the 2 of you coming from different specialties, it's going to be both of you are going to get this question. If there was one thing for riders to work on or think about to make their horsemanship better this week, what would that be? So Paul, from the perspective for the rider, Justin, from the perspective for the horse. If there's one thing that riders could work on or think about to make their horsemanship better this week, what would it be?
Be still. Be still and see what comes. I had a lesson with Patrick today, so I got stuff on my mind.
Oh, man.
That was a pretty good theme in that session, too. So, yeah, there you go.
And I'm still tired.
That's great. I love it.
For me, it would be connection. And that awareness of how do I connect, and what am I connected with, and how, because it's just really is the foundation of everything. So
I love it. Be still and connect. Cool. That's fantastic. So what comes to mind as one of the hardest lessons you've had to learn so far in the pursuit of your passion as you're presenting it, as you're sharing it?
So many lessons.
Yeah.
So many lessons.
There's always tomorrow.
There you go. There you go. There's always tomorrow. I love that Laura posted in the chat here my favorite quote from Gone with the Wind. After all, tomorrow is another day.
Another day.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think for me, it really goes back to the gift that horses have been to me, which is, it's been easy to learn with horses because it's just the way it is with me and horses. But much harder to learn in every other aspect of my life is that you don't have to know everything.
Nice. Right? Whatever you don't know, there's probably an Instagram influencer that you can pick it up from. And they're popular, so they've got to be right. Okay, so 2 more questions here for wrapping up. Do you have a favorite book, or what are you currently reading?
One of my favorite books of all time is The Alchemist.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And I return to it often.
Yeah.
Just, I always find when I'm going through a very big shift in life, I return to that book, and it always has a different meaning for me. Are we supposed to answer both? Because I'm currently reading.
You don't have to, but you certainly can.
Well, now I'm going to tell you. I'm currently reading Rassenay Explains Bochet by Rassenay, but that's my dive into the French tradition.
Yeah.
Very different than the parable route, but
yeah, I love that. That's great. Yeah.
I'm currently reading a book that he bought, which is The Horse.
Oh, I'm reading that one too, technically.
I know you.
Yeah.
Well, technically, but
it's listening.
You keep listening to it and moving my spot.
That's weird. Just because I'm too cheap to get my own Audible account.
I don't know if so I'm going to answer a different question. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I'm gonna answer the book that has had the biggest impact on my thinking in the last 10, 15 years. And that would be a book by Dan Siegel, who's a psychiatrist, and it's called Mind, A Journey to the Heart of Being Human. And that I think that has had, I think you'd agree.
I had a hard time grasping that one. That was a dense book.
Well, no, my apologies to Dan, but I think it's just horribly written.
It really was very painful. Very painful to get through.
And I'm sure there's some people that like that writing style, but it just wanders and circles back. And I like, come on, get to it. But the ideas in there ultimately are foundational for a whole crap ton of the work that we do. Mm-hmm. So, we talk about regulation and integration and connection, what it means to be well, wellness as a foundation for performance, horses, humans, all that stuff. It's just, it has so many amazing ideas in there. So that's
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Good. Wellness as a foundation for performance. Justin, it sounds like he's talking about yoga. That's an inside joke. No. just harassing Justin for that. I was going to bring that up when you were talking about the way that you were marketing wellness versus marketing like fix the problem. Right. It was like Justin, do yoga versus Justin, just do this one stretch for your left, whatever. Like, okay, whatever. Oh, that's funny. I love it. Cool. Okay, final one, and I'm stealing this one from podcaster Tim Ferriss just because I think it's such a great question. If you had a billboard to print a message big enough for the whole world to see, what would it say?
Build bridges, don't burn them.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with my first impulse. It would just say
Perfect.
connect. It would say connect.
Connect.
And then I would need
Cool.
he knows I would need like 47 other billboards right next to it to explain.
Yeah, he needs one of those digital billboards that you can just keep
Rolling through. There you go.
Yeah.
That's funny. That reminds me of like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where he'd be driving and passing all these billboards like slow down, stop, you've gone too far, the road is out, the whatever, yeah.
So Patrick, what would be your billboard?
B.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it would be right now. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's great.
B.
Mm-hmm.
Just B.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. All right, guys, this is so much fun. Again, for everybody listening, check them out at it's ridingfar.com, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Dr. Paul Haefner, Justin Haefner, thank you so much for your time in this call for, again, episode number 60 of Talking About Horses. And I'm sure we've had so many little offshoots on here that we've got to do this again several times, and then maybe we'll get through them all. But I look forward to the chance to do this again and see where else the road takes us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you for having us.
Cool. Thanks so much. We'll catch you guys next time.
All right.